Let's talk right now about whether there was any common sense or not in the US live televised vice presidential debate last night between Tim Waltz for the Democrats and JD Vance for the Republicans. It was the first and likely only debate between those two men going head-to-head ahead of the November election. Well, let's talk about this right now with Rick Gates. He's a former deputy campaign manager for Donald Trump way back in 2016. Good afternoon to you, Rick.
Hi, Julia. How are you?
Very well indeed. Thanks for joining us. There's no doubt at all you are a Republican. You're probably more likely to say that you think that JD Vance did well over Tim Waltz. But what is interesting is it does appear that, much as you can find anyone who's a neutral observer, that there does seem to be a view that actually both men did well, but that JD Vance, who's been written off by many as, oh, he's weird, he's uncomfortable to watch, actually had a very good night. And even some of the people you might think would be big Democrat supporters admitted he had a good night. Is that how you saw it?
Yeah, I think rule number one in a vice presidential debate is don't do damage,
Yes.
To you or your candidate. And both men, I thought, did a very good job. They were cordial. They talked about issues. There was probably one moment Tim Waltz had in trying to describe why he misstated a trip to Hong Kong, that he got a little tongue-tied and could have answered better. But all in all, they focused on what the American people wanted. And it was, I thought, a very, very good debate. And likely not just the only vice presidential debate. It'll probably be the last debate that we have, because Donald Trump is not, debating Kamala Harris.
No, because he basically he really overpegged his chances in the debate for him against Kamala Harris, and basically said she can't debate, she'll be useless. And she basically, given a very low bar, really very much exceeded those expectations. Let's listen to a couple of clips and watch a couple of clips there. One when JD Vance was talking about Iran and talking about Donald Trump. Here's what he had to say.
That as much as Governor Waltz just accused Donald Trump of being an agent of chaos, Donald Trump actually delivered stability in the world, and he did it by establishing effective deterrence. People were afraid of stepping out of line. Iran, which launched this attack, has received over $100 billion in unfrozen assets thanks to the Kamala Harris administration. What do they use that money for? They use it to buy weapons that they're now launching against our allies, and God forbid, potentially launching against the United States as well.
There's no doubt at all that, the Middle Eastern politics is definitely creeping into certainly British politics as well, and certainly into American politics. How significant is what's happening right now, particularly between Israel and Iran, in what is going to happen on Election Day for the US?
Yeah, honestly, not very relevant, in terms of what Americans are most concerned about. Sure, it's a global issue right now. There is concern about what's going on. But at the end of the day, people are going in and they're voting on the economy, because that's what matters to them the most. So I don't think it's going to have a lot of relevance. It was significant last night because of, Iran launching missiles against Israel. So it became an issue. But I think over the long term, people are not going to think about it, come November 5th.
It's not a bread and butter issue, nothing like the cost of living, inflation, massive big issues, but also, of course, immigration. But, of course, it will have big impacts if there is a wider war. And, of course, there's been a big concern by American voters on all sides in recent years about, not want to be the world's policeman. We don't want to get involved in yet another war. So many servicemen and women returning from the Middle East, wounded, returning, in body bags, that there has been a strong movement from a lot of Americans to say, look, not our problem.
Yeah, the issue is global chaos, exactly what, JD Vance and Tim Waltz were talking about last night. And there is concern that it's not just Iran, but it's Ukraine, it's Russia, it's China, it's Taiwan, North Korea. So now all of a sudden there's multiple issues on the world stage that are concerning because they're destabilizing across the world. The interesting thing about the Iran issue is, as you know, in the United States and as in the UK, there have been massive protests, related to a lot of the actions in the Middle East. And Kamala Harris has been facing a lot of pressure on the Israel-Palestine front. And that will be an issue in certain battleground states, especially what we call the Rust Belt, Michigan, Wisconsin, even Pennsylvania, where there will be some backlash because of the way that the American voters feel about that scenario.
Yeah, indeed. Let's also watch and listen to a little bit of a clip from the Democrat VP hopeful Tim Waltz. Something of a gaffe. This is what's being talked about online about him befriending school shooters. Let's hear what the question was and what he had to say.
Senator, thank you. Governor, you previously opposed an assault weapons ban, but it's only later in your political career did you change your position. Why?
Yeah, I sat in that office with those Sandy Hook parents. I've become friends with school shooters. I've seen it. Look, the NRA, I was an NRA guy for a long time. They used to teach gun safety. I'm of an age where my shotgun was in my car so I could pheasant hunt after football practice.
Now, both Tim Waltz and Kamala Harris made a big thing about how they're gun owners, and it's a very big issue, you know, with America and those Second Amendment rights. It was clearly, you know, a slip of the tongue. He became friend of the victims of school shooters. But it's those sort of gaffes that get picked up on social media now and go everywhere. In the same ways, what Donald Trump had to say about, you know, it wasn't a gaffe, he kept saying it, about those Haitian migrants he accused of, you know, of eating people's pet dogs and cats. Is this how the debate is? So the election is going to be decided, sort of who said what and what goes on social media? Does it play into sort of narratives about these candidates?
Look, I think there are certain scenarios that it does impact. Obviously, it impacted Joe Biden after his first debate with Donald Trump because he exited the race, and there were a lot of gaffes in that that the American people, you know, were worried about. With respect to Tim Waltz and JD Vance, look, they both said things. They even talked about it last night. There's been slips of the tongue. There's been some misstatements on both their parts, and they both acknowledge that is part of the job. Obviously, I don't think there's anybody that believes Tim Waltz was siding, you know, with the school shooters at Sandy Hook. But at the end of the day, it does matter, and those are the things that show that he was nervous. That show that, you know, he didn't do well under pressure in that moment. So that is what the American people will look at, because they did talk about character. They did talk about personality to some extent last night. The American people are going to be very concerned about what if Donald Trump and or Kamala Harris, depending on who wins, you know, something happens to them. That means one of those two gentlemen last night are going to be the president. Yeah,
and especially also decided that Tim Waltz was, you know, he's you know, the football coach, the all-American guy. And again, just as Kamala Harris, let's be honest, was a DEI hire. You know, Biden said, I'm an old white guy. Basically, I'm going to choose a black woman. That was what he was going to do for his VP. She was written off as an absolute no-hope, useless case until the moment when suddenly they realised Biden wasn't going to win the election, and she was the only option for them in such a short space of time. And of course, Tim Waltz, weirdly also a DI hire as a white man. I mean, this is quite, so it's just what I find extraordinary in left-wing politics, that this is how it is. Now, the key thing about JD Vance is he's got an amazing story to tell, you know, his rags to riches tale. He's been written off by the Democrats as a weirdo. There's a few awkward moments in terms of making small talk and some speeches and things, but it seems to me he's actually a very good communicator. And some of the things that people have been saying is he's actually better at communicating Donald Trump's views, whether you agree with them or not, and I disagree with quite a lot of them, as I do with both sides, actually. But he's better at communicating Donald Trump's views than Donald Trump is, who certainly in that debate against Kamala Harris just kind of went off on one. Every answer, it was totally incoherent. He talked about sort of 10 different things each time, and you'd never had any idea when he was going to come back to the question.
Yeah, when you look at that, like I said last night, it was a real debate. You know, both men had a good command of knowledge, but JD Vance was going into it, I think, you know, looked at as, you know, going to struggle more. And he came out looking better because of the way that he dealt with the debate. Yeah. He was very articulate. He's obviously very intelligent. Again, you're right. You may not agree with him on policies, but if you look at how he tackled each issue last night, what he did was really kind of moderate some of his more radical positions that people have alleged that he has. So he came across as somebody that the American people said, hey, if something happens to Donald Trump, I think this guy could, you know, be president. Okay. That's where he made the mark last night.
Just finally, very briefly, if you would, Rick Gates, does any of this matter? Does anyone cast their vote depending on who the vice president could be?
Not at all. Maybe other than their spouses. It really doesn't move the needle, and it won't. When it's psychology, when you go into the voting booth, you're thinking about Kamala Harris or Donald Trump, not the vice president.
What a choice. Rick Gates, former deputy campaign manager for Donald Trump in 2016. Brief word from Benedict Spencer.
I do think JD Vance has potentially set himself up, if Donald Trump doesn't win this time, for next time. I think he's actually, even though there was a lot of sort of negativity about his selection based on his politics and all sorts of things, I think actually
the mainstream media in America doesn't like those politics.
Yeah, I think that he's proven himself to be a very effective communicator. So expect many more attacks against him rather than just Donald Trump in the coming weeks. I think that he's shown that he's a far more formidable opponent than perhaps Donald Trump is, and better at articulating a vision for whatever Trumpism is in the next 4 years.
Very interesting. Thank you very much indeed.